Welcome to the Capital Forum's interview series sponsored by Kroll on Track. My name is David Blattner, and we're delighted to have Barry Nigro here with us today. Barry is a partner at Fried Frank and chairs their antitrust department. Barry previously served as Deputy Director for the Federal Trade Commission's Bureau of Competition, where he managed the Bureau's merger and anti-competitive practices, investigations, and litigation. So Barry, happy to have you here today.
Thank you, David.
We wanted to talk with you today about sort of a new area of concern, and it has to do with concentration of ownership among, I would say, common ownership in concentrated industries. So describe for us what the issue is and where this concern comes from.
So the issue, and I'm not sure there is an issue, but I guess we'll talk about that in a bit. But I guess the theory is that, and the question is whether cross ownership by financial investors among a number of different competitors, even at the minority level and even passive, has any sort of effect on pricing. And there are a couple studies out there, one in particular that is a working paper that was published by the Michigan Business School, which did an econometric analysis controlling for factors such as industry concentration and in the airline industry, length of route, cost, and those sorts of things. And what they observed is that where you have cross-ownership by financial investors in competitors, there's a significant difference in price, and in particular, the price was higher. Okay. And so the question is that because of the cross-ownership, or is that because there's something they're missing in the econometric study?
Okay. So what sort of evidence were they trying to parse to determine whether the common ownership was the causal factor that they saw with the higher prices?
So the econometric study itself, I don't think gets that far. I don't think it establishes that there's any causation. So I like to think about it as more of an observation that there's a correlation between cross ownership in concentrated industries and higher prices. And there has been some work done by Einar Alhaig at Harvard has published a paper suggesting that notwithstanding the absence of direct evidence of causation, that maybe that should be addressed under the antitrust laws if you can show an effect, as okay. This paper suggests exists.
So what's the theory that under the antitrust laws that you would use to deal with this observed common ownership problem leading to higher prices?
So under the existing antitrust laws, I think you'll have to dig hard to find a theory that would get a lot of traction. Absent sort of any evidence of coordination or information sharing, I think a Section 1 Sherman Act case would be difficult. The other approach that you could possibly take is under Section 7 of the Clayton Act, and look at whether the actual investment in the competing firms resulted in a lessening of competition. But it's hard to equate higher prices with a less competitive market. I mean, you could try to make that inference, but I don't know that you could prove that one caused the other. And under the Section 7, you need to show that there's some lessening of competition. So okay. So it's not clear that there's an easy avenue for challenging the conduct. And I think Bill Baer, the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust, recognized that when he testified on the Hill recently and said they're looking at this issue in the context of airlines and other industries, so it's not just airlines, and said if they find evidence that concerns them and with respect to whether there's an effect, he intimated that they might need to go back to Congress to seek some sort of legislation that could potentially address that. So implicit in his comment was an acknowledgement that the existing antitrust laws may not fully address the observation that's made in this paper.
So let me go back to the Section 7 theory for
Sure.
a section. So under Section 7, you would be able to challenge a particular individual or entity's acquisition of a particular share in an airline or some other industry participant, and stop that. But how would you go about sort of dealing with the bigger problem of the common ownership of shares among different airlines?
Well, so what you're bringing up is the fact that there have been other enforcement actions under Section 7 where competitors have taken a partial ownership interest in a competing firm, and all of those cases have involved situations where there's been some element of control, or where as a result of the investment, you could demonstrate that there would be an actual change in the incentive and ability to raise price.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge with this sort of cross-ownership question is, to the extent that the firms don't have any control and they're not actively lobbying the targets, the airlines in this case, to behave in a certain manner,
mm-hmm.
to run their businesses in a certain manner, it's unclear sort of how you would articulate the theory on which you would base the argument that competition will be lessened as a result of this investment. Imagine going to a judge and trying to explain that a 5% interest in two competing firms that's wholly passive or mostly passive is somehow going to result in a lessening of competition because of the observation made in this econometric study. I think that would be a difficult sell, and that it would take more than that in order to persuade a judge to enjoin the investment. And absent some sort of a court order, I don't know how you stop it.
Yeah, presumably if you're just making the acquisition, even if you're making them simultaneously, you can't start to exercise any ownership or control because the HSR rules are going to prevent you from doing that until the agencies have had a chance to look at the transaction and the waiting period has expired. So developing evidence while the companies are under the waiting period, I think, would be pretty hard to do.
Absolutely, and then in addition to the HSR issue, these companies, they may recognize that they have a significant holder of equity that also has an interest in their competitors, and there may be some incentive to keep that, to keep that investor happy, but they also have a sort of a fiduciary obligation to their other shareholders,
mm-hmm.
and so, to some extent, there's a tension between that fiduciary obligation and the theory of competitive harm, and so that's why I think at least under the existing antitrust laws, there would need to be something more than just the investment itself. I think it would be extremely challenging to bring a case under those circumstances.
Okay, so you mentioned a little bit, Bill Barrett talked about this in the context of some airline investigations that they currently are doing at the Department of Justice. What do you expect to see as far as any enforcement action from the Department of Justice with respect to this theory?
So it's hard to say what the outcome's going to be without knowing what the evidence is, but let's assume that the Department of Justice finds nothing but what's observed in this paper, the common the cross ownership among these airlines by certain financial investors. I I don't think there'll be an enforcement action if that's all they find. On the other hand, if there's more than that, some sort of coordination, either directly among the airlines or indirectly through investors or others, then that's a little bit of a different picture, because that falls more into sort of a traditional Section 1 type of claim. And so it's possible, depending on the type of evidence, the nature of the evidence, and what was communicated, what was shared, if anything, that they would bring an action on that basis. But without some sort of direct evidence or strong evidence from which an inference could be drawn that there was coordination, I don't see any sort of an enforcement action coming out of it.
Okay. Let's assume that they have that extra bit of evidence and they still have this common ownership issue out there, and they decide to do some kind of enforcement action. Would you expect them to do anything, or can they do anything about the common ownership issue as part of an antitrust action?
Well, if they, so if they were to bring some sort of a enforcement action based on let's say a hub and spoke theory, they obviously could seek some sort of injunctive relief with respect to the parties involved in that particular case. But if you're asking whether they could do something that would have sort of a broader impact, I don't think they can without some sort of legislation, whether it would be something analogous to what we have under Section 8 of the Clayton Act with interlocking directorates, or some other type of provision. I don't think there's a vehicle right now for the Department of Justice to prohibit cross-ownership by financial firms. And I'm not sure beyond that whether it's good policy. I mean, imagine how would you police that, and what would it do to firms like mutual funds that are widely held and have investments in all kinds of companies that are highly diversified? I mean, would it prohibit that? And I think it could end up sort of creating more problems than it solves.
Okay. Barry, I want to thank you for speaking with us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.